I call this meeting to order. This is the regular meeting of the Northfield Public School Board. Today is Monday, March 13th, 2017, and the time is 7 p.m. Dr. Hillman, there were a few items in the table file.
Yes, we just had a couple of items in the table file this evening, some personnel appointments, and then we also had just some additional things for our work session, our wrap-up of the work session.
Okay, great. Thank you. If there's no objection, we'll add these items to the agenda as we move forward. We now have an opportunity for public comment. This is a chance for anyone residing in the Northfield Public School Board to address, Northfield Public School District, to address the board. Is there anyone here who wishes to address the board? Okay. If you could come forward, I'd like to remind the public that this is a listening opportunity for the board and not a time to debate an issue. Also, the Minnesota Government Data Practices Act prohibits comments about specific student matters, even without naming the student in open session. This includes the public comment portion of our meeting. The board respects and values input on student matters, but when it relates to a specific student or to a specific student matter, such input must be heard by the appropriate personnel, such as the building principal or superintendent, and not during an open meeting of the school board. With that being said, I see you're at the podium. If you could identify yourself by giving your name and address, and if you represent a group, and we'd appreciate if you limit your remarks to 3 minutes.
My name is Olivia Fry, and I live at 401 Highland Avenue, and I represent myself. I've learned that the district intends to build new schools at Greenvale and the high school in the amount of over $100 million. This expenditure would require, I assume, a referendum, and if passed, would raise property taxes significantly, raising property taxes even higher for our businesses in Northfield. There will be other financial considerations in the years to come. Republicans intend to gut the ESEA title funding. You all know what that is, right? And divert these monies to what they call school choice, which is vouchers for private schools and for homeschooling. So these funds will be eliminated. Title I through, I think now it's Title VII. Title VII is for bilingual education. Title I is for programs to help low-income, at-risk children who are failing or who are at risk of failing, additional support for them in programs when they're having trouble with math and reading and other areas. I would rather see monies to support programs like this rather than brick and mortar. I also understand that the high school, I may have some of these things wrong, the high school will be torn down, this building. I find that to be unacceptable in terms of using practical, smart use of resources that exist. I hope there will be at least 2 hearings on this matter or more, and that all citizens of Northfield will be provided with information that is detailed in ways that will reach everyone. I don't get the Northfield news, and I only occasionally go online. I'm kind of a dinosaur. So I hope that the district will keep that in mind when providing information for people who reside in Northfield. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone here who wishes to address the board? Good. Seeing no one else come forward, we will move on to approval of the minutes. Board members, you have in your packet minutes of the regular school board meeting held on Monday, February 27th, 2017. Is there a motion to approve the set of minutes? Moved by Jeff. Is there a second? Second by Amy. Any questions or comments? All those in favor of approving the minutes of the regular school board meeting held on Monday, February 27th, 2017, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Move on to announcements and recognitions. Dr. Hillman.
Yes, I just have a couple this evening. I want to, first of all, congratulate the just about 100 students who participated in the Rock and Roll Revival over the last couple of weeks. 6 shows, nearly sold out every night. And if you had a chance to see it, a truly inspiring and fantastic performance each and every night. And I want to thank Ray Coudray, who is the producer of that program, the other folks who helped with it, and the countless volunteers. I had a chance to see the show in the audience several times, but on Saturday night I worked backstage And what an event in terms of just to get that thing to the stage. And so literally countless volunteers who helped our kids put on what many people consider to be a very professional show with high school students. It certainly is a jewel of the district, and we're very thankful for Mr. Coudray, his assistance, and the work of all the volunteers, and of course, the bravery and the courage and the work that our students put in to put such a wonderful program on for the community. We also want to congratulate senior Jack Cuddy, who placed second at the Minnesota State High School League swim and dive competition in diving. And so we're just giving a couple of the most, we've had quite a winter, as you know, in terms of, but I'm just giving the most recent update. So congratulations to Jack on that second place finish at the state meet. That's quite a special accomplishment. We're really proud of the hard work that he's done. And then of course, also last week, our Northfield High School boys Raider hockey team celebrated by being in the state tournament at the Excel Energy Center for the first time in program history. And they came away with a really good fourth place finish, a lot of school spirit, a lot of energy surrounding that. And so congratulations to these performers and these athletes from Northfield High School.
Excellent, thank you. Right, there's lots going on. So board members, are there any other, anything else you'd like to add? Amy?
I just wanted to say kudos to the Sibley School 5th grade teachers and students. I had the pleasure of attending their environmental summit on Friday, and the students all had different projects talking about different things, anything to do with the environment. I was very impressed by it. Lots of different ideas, but my favorite juxtaposition was one person in favor of nuclear energy, and then just 2 projects over was someone opposed to nuclear energy, and they seemed to both get along really well. So it was good. It was a very good summit.
Excellent. Any other comments? I had the opportunity to go with Amy as well to Sibley, and it was really interesting. They had wanted to combine writing and some debate style around the environmental issues, and so it was really great. True 21st century essential skills, and was really pleased to see how many use their iPads to create iMovies. And I would ask them, oh, how did you, oh, it's so easy. Let me show you. So yeah, so they're utilizing that, and this is only their second year, you know, with the device, so it's great. And then one other opportunity I had, Bridgewater, in conjunction with the high school, did Read Across America, and it was spearheaded by Pam Charlton and the 1st grade team at Bridgewater. And so no less than 600 of our high school students walked over on a Friday morning and read one-on-one. Because there were so many high school students there, each elementary school student at Bridgewater had the opportunity to read one-on-one with the high school student, and it was really cool to see. And lots of conversations going over above and beyond what the book was talking about necessarily, so there was some really good interchange with an older, very cool high school student. But when you think of half of our building willing to go over there and read with the kids, and Just Foods donated some apples, and so it was really great. Really great. Okay, is there anything else? No. All right, so let's move on to our first item for discussion. Tonight we welcome Barb Wormson, the interim director of Arcadia Charter School, talking a presentation around their contract renewal application. As we know, their contract expires on June 30th of 2017.
Yeah, and if I can just, we're very thankful to have Barb here as she is working through the renewal process, and she was happy to learn, as well as folks from Prairie Creek last week, that Northfield Public Schools last week did receive our authorization to remain an authorizer with the department for the next 5 years. And so, as you know, that process really changed this last time around. So we're very pleased to have that designation as a charter school authorizer from the Minnesota Department of Education for the next 5 years. And we look forward, again, we're one of 3 public school districts left in the state who still authorize charter schools, and we couldn't be more proud of the work that our 2 charter schools do. And so we're thrilled to have Barb here talk tonight about the renewal application, and that will lead into the contract that we'll be bringing back to you in April.
Great, thank you. And if I can add to the many congratulatory notes that you've shared, Arcadia Charter School has placed first in the state in our only competitive sport, that would be poetry out loud. But it's really a great honor. It was Anna Klobuchar, and she is with, the program was put on by the Loft, and she's our representative, beating out all of Minnesota, and she will be in Washington, D.C. in April, so that's very exciting for us. The slides that I've put together are a little bit different than the report because I assume you've had time to look at the report, and this kind of brings up some of the things that were mentioned, maybe in a little bit more detail. Arcadia Charter School is designated a high-quality charter school, and that means that they have won an honor that only 26 out of the state's 180 charter schools can earn. So we're pretty proud of that. It's based on the 12 academic measures from the MMR, MDEs, so proficiency, focused proficiency in math and reading, growth and focused growth in math, reading, and science, graduation rate, and focused graduation. What the focused means, and I didn't know this until I investigated it, so I'm assuming you guys don't either. There's a lot of statistics that goes into it. What they do is they look at the demographics. They take out the all students rating so that they're just looking at the special populations and the free and reduced lunch, and then they take out white. So they're just looking at diversity. And in those measures, those become the focused proficiency. And I think we do very well in that, and we will show you more of that in a minute. They also look at that over time, so it's over the past 3 years, and they look at financial stability over time and clear state reports over time. This actually is in your report that was submitted. This is what makes us look the best, actually. So this is the MCA tests. And if you look at the very top line at the end, let's do it that way. At the top, the blue line, that is Arcadia. Right under that, the orange line, that is Northfield. And this is on the reading proficiency. Right under Northfield is the state level. And then down below, that gray line at the end is Minnesota New Country School. And the reason we compare ourselves to Minnesota New Country School is because first of all, we modeled the school after them when it was developed back in 2003, and continue to work with them. In some ways, we have altered our model. They've stayed with the pure project-based model. We also offer some classes. And it's just kind of nice to see the student beat the master, you know? So is the educational program a success? Again, this is a different sort of graph than was presented. We do have a very high percentage of special education, 45% this year, up from 26% in 2011. One thing that I have heard as interim director is, how does this affect the other students? We've seen by earning the high quality charter school that we do very well with our special education students, but that is a high percentage, it's a high percentage. So I thought a nice one measure might be to compare it to the number of students who we have successfully completing PSEO student classes. So if you look at the third column down, you can see that has been largely unaffected. We had a larger percentage early in 2011, 2012, then that dropped down, and then it is coming back up. So I think that, I think what this shows, I hope what it shows, is that diversity is good for everyone. Is the organization effective and well run? We've won the finance award for the past 3 years. Now, to get the finance award, you need to be timely submission of financial data, select indicators of physical health like the fund balance, accuracy of financial reporting, no findings on the internal audit. This is not a huge deal. There are 563 eligible entities reporting financial information, and 409 of them win the award. But it's a lot harder to do it if you're a charter school. So we are actually very proud of that. And I brought the list, but you can't see it. Arcadia and Prairie Creek are right next to each other on the list, so we both have won that. We're proud of that. Is the school meeting its legal obligations? Yes. We've give climate and culture surveys going out to parents and teachers regularly. And a lot of this section looks at, are we meeting the needs of the students, not only the students with special needs, but all of our students. We've jumped up, as I've said, in our special education. We are very similar to Northfield in our demographics. Northfield Public, Northfield Public Schools. I guess we're all Northfield Public Schools in a way. We have increased our staffing as a result of the increase in special education. And I think the next, there's something missing here. That's why I'm having trouble. So over on the side, which for some reason didn't show up in this slide, is an overview of what the disability areas are. And I find it interesting because we have, I will just read them to you, 19 other health disabilities, learning disabilities, 14 students, emotional behavior disorders, 11 students, autism spectrum, 10 students. That's the surprisingly high one. And for speech and language and deaf and hard of hearing. We're finding that for some students on the autistic spectrum disorders, our project-based model works very, very well. It involves independent learning and support in that from coaches. Our strategies in place for sustaining success and continuing improvement over the next charter term. I would say yes. So we are in the beginnings of our strategic planning. It goes on all the time, but we are disaggregating our mission and our vision and letting it guide us on where we are going into the future. We have 13 sitting board committees. There are 4 of them. There are a lot more. And now we're adding another one, so now we have 14 committees. That's significant because we only have 13 teachers, 2 administrators, and our small board. So everybody sits on more than one committee and everybody works very hard. We're working with responsive classroom and developmental designs. Those are programs that were developed by our own Linda Crawford, who used to be the director out at Prairie Creek. And I'm just delighted to see how Arcadia is using that so well. So that a lot of social community building going on with that. We are a Q-Comp school, and we certainly appreciate our authorizer oversight. Means the world. Do you have any questions? That's what I have.
Barb, if it would be okay if I just mention the site visit that we did. So part of the something that happens every year is the authorizer does a day-long visit to each site, and this particular year we did with an official external visit. We combined the site visit with an external visit, and so Simon Tyler, who was the former director at Arcadia, who's now the director at Prairie Creek, and Chris Bussman, who is a principal in the Farmington School District and a Northfield resident, was doing a superintendent internship with me. We did the full day visit to Arcadia, and they had us packed through the whole day. And the summary of our visit is in your packet. But if I were to describe what we saw that day, I believe the magic number is 128 students, right, Barb? So
that's right.
As we watched through the day, in the Arcadia culture, the project-based learning piece works very well. We observed engaged students throughout the day. We saw a number of different pieces of individual student problem solving, whether it be on an academic piece or a social circumstance. We got to talk with high school students about how they create their own set of rules, that they all abide by with the adults, and that for the first time in a long time they had to add a new rule mid-year, which is a big deal. And if you have a teenager in your house or a preteen, you know how they made it a no bottle flipping zone. So this was the big rule that they changed in the middle of the year, but really clear that there's a lot of student voice, a lot of student choice. I had a chance to sit in on a more formal academic course that is taking place. This was surrounding a specific writing course. So where Arcadia started is almost solely a project-based school. Over the years, there have been some specific coursework that has developed that students can choose to take. And so we had a really wonderful site visit and really clear that Arcadia is going in the right direction. Staff who are engaged, students who are engaged, of course parents are involved there every day. It's just the nature of the building. And so we had a very pleasant and informative site visit this year. And again, the summary of it is in your packet. And if you have any questions on that too, I could certainly answer those.
Okay. Any questions or comments board members have? Ellen?
So thank you for such a thorough report. Two comments. One is I'm really enjoying knowing that our seniors this year are doing their second time with a capstone project.
Yes.
And what I like so much is that you hope that charter schools some of the ideas would filter back and forth, and so really seeing how that's happened at the high school has been really exciting for us. And so I appreciate hearing about how it's continued to work in Arcadia, and then also how you focused in on math and some of the core curriculum at the same time. So I think it's really a nice balance that you've provided, and I appreciate seeing that coming through in your report.
Thank you.
Margaret, you had a question.
Just a comment. I have the privilege of being able to substitute teach at Arcadia, both for teachers and for paraprofessionals. And I'm just really impressed with the kids and the program, but just how the program works for these kids and how the teachers work on that program. I'm just impressed. So thanks for being here.
Thank you, Margaret.
Other comments? No.
Thank you for the report. Very informative. I noticed from the numbers there's a significant change in services to children with special needs between 2003 and 2017. Can you explain a little bit more about that?
I can't tell you why. I can tell you, and I don't have the data at hand. I just know from being an experienced one-son, that this is happening in a lot of charter schools, especially in the middle school and high school levels. So I think what's happening, just my guess based on my experience, I don't have the data for Arcadia, but these are parents and kids who not only don't make it in the regular classroom, they don't really quite fit in the special ed classrooms either, because one child said, I can't go to that class, they're the ones who are bullying me. They're the ones who are making my life miserable, so I don't want to be in special education. Sometimes it just works better to be in a very small, and ultimately, although the project base gets a reputation of being you're so independent that where's the line between independence and not being supervised? But in fact, there's a lot of structure to the project process, how you do that. And we had an incident today where a student got into a little bit of a difficulty, and within seconds he had 1, 2, 3 teachers just right there talking to him. He didn't have a chance. And then he was in my office. So I think there's more accountability as a result as well.
Thank you.
Other questions, comments? I had a couple, following up what Noel had said, obviously this really substantial increase just in the last year with the 45% special ed. Do you anticipate that having some effect on your fund balance? I mean, one thing that I've always commented over the years when Arcadia has come to the school board meeting is just the amount of appreciation and respect I have for you building that fund balance the way you have, because we're certainly aware of the funding challenges, particularly at a charter school where you don't have the opportunity for voter-approved levies. So that's so impressive, and I'm just wondering if that trajectory remains, where you think challenges might exist for your financial stability.
I don't think it will affect our fund balance because of the reimbursement from federal and state dollars. It's not 100% reimbursement from state, so it digs in a little bit.
Okay.
But we've been able to hire enough staff, and we have an excellent special education director, Leanne Sanborn, that we contract with. This year we added a nurse, and that nurse will probably, if the 4 or 5 students who are really extremely physically involved with, they need nursing care during the day. So this year we have a health office with a nurse, and we'll have her more time next time too. But because she spends, then we estimate how much time is special education, how much time is general education. Most of it's special ed, so we can bill it to the, yeah. So I don't think that will affect our fund balance.
So you're not anticipating a big cross subsidy then, which is great.
Yeah, right.
Good.
No, I'm not. No, I'm not.
Well, and I appreciated the report, and I think board members, just the depth of, really the deep dive into a lot of the issues of Arcadia, and I think what your comment to Noah was really insightful, and not only just special ed students, but Northfield students in general, really finding that Arcadia is that niche. And I think as a board we've been supportive of charter schools and the whole authorization process for us to be able to continue to authorize, just because of the choice it really does offer our students in Northfield, and we know that it's a really good fit for the students that are there. So
Well, it means everything to us, and I don't know that Arcadia could be what it is without the support of the Northfield board.
great, thank you. Any parting comments or questions board members have?
Well, and
Dr. Hillman.
Barb will be back with us, as I had promised you she'd be back, as she and I this week will get together and start working on the contract. And again, the way that the law has now changed just a bit, there's actually, in the contract, there's some specific performance indicators that Barb and I will be working on that are pieces that will go over the 5-year period. We anticipate bringing that contract back to you, hopefully at the first board meeting in April, for you to be able to review it, asking you to formally approve it at the second board meeting in April so we can submit it to the department and get all of the I's dotted and T's crossed that we need. So it's been a pleasure to work with Barb this year in terms of this renewal process. As an interim director and an experienced Warrenson, this is really a good fit for us to work through this together. So thank you to Barb for working through it, and we anticipate that we'll have no issue moving forward with the contract.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Okay, good. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Okay, so we will move on to our second item for individual action, or I'm sorry, discussion, which is the additional FTE allocation for 2017-18. Dr. Hillman.
So in the packet, I just had included a preview of a couple of positions that I'm looking at requesting addition for next year. And again, asking for no action this evening, but just sharing with you our administrative team's thoughts. And then we'll come back to you at the next meeting asking for approval so that we can start to move on it should you authorize us to do so. And I see just in time middle school principal Greg Gelino walked in, which is excellent. Because we'll need to, if people have questions about the health teacher FTE, we can have him assist us with it. So the first proposal that we're looking at for next year, as you had heard from the social emotional learning presentation at the last meeting, is a 1.0 FTE health teacher at Northfield Middle School, and our anticipated cost on that is an $85,000 expenditure investment. And want to make sure that we're really clear about how these kinds of investments align with our strategic plan. And in the handout that I gave you, it aligns with the near-term priority of building and fostering relationships, a commitment to social emotional health for all, and also with our near-term priority in the strategic plan of equitable opportunities and support for all career and college paths. And the key piece here is that, as we mentioned before, when we look at integrating a direct instruction of social emotional curriculum, at least K-8 next year, with 9-12 to follow very soon after there. Working with Mr. Gelino and the middle school staff, it's determined that the best strategy would be to integrate social emotional learning within our health classes. And as you know, we have health instruction right now in 6th grade and in 8th grade. And as Mr. Gelino and I looked at the the best way to make social emotional learning happen at Northfield Middle School, a lot of brainstorming, a lot of work with staff determined that if we could add health in 7th grade, we would be able to redistribute the health standards, which frankly are stretched at both 6th and 8th grade to be able to get all of the standards in effectively. We also know that that kind of instruction for middle school students at a time of their life where their prefrontal cortex is being rewired in the most significant way since they were toddlers, that health instruction is very important. So allowing a little bit more space for delivery of the health standards, but that would still allow room for us to integrate social emotional curriculum into each of those grade level health experience, as well as also allow us to meet the requirements of the Minnesota's World's Best Workforce legislation, and more importantly, the Northfield Promise benchmarks, by making sure that students have career interests, goals, and a vision for their own future by the end of 8th grade. And again, we work on those pieces and we are compliant with it, but we have heard from our community and from Northfield Promise that on that career and college ready component, we'd like to have a little bit more intentionality. And so this is really quite a bit of bang for our buck in terms of the fact that we're going to be able to redistribute our health standards in a way that will allow a more in-depth instruction. It allows us to integrate social emotional learning, as has been one of our near-term priorities of the strategic plan and aligns with Northfield Promise's benchmarks. And then also work on that career and college ready piece, because again, as we've talked, an important piece we think about social emotional health is having that positive future narrative. So myself as a 7th and 8th grade student, looking out and believing that I have a path, and I know that when I believe right now, even though it could change a few dozen times because that has happened to all of us, but what we know is if students have that positive future narrative, they see themselves as a successful adult and they can see themselves doing a specific career or a different, some kind of passion after they leave high school. We know that that helps them have a better high school experience with some intentionality in the kind of courses that they take and being engaged in their education. So that's the first piece, is the 1.0 health teacher at Northfield Middle School. And so I think what I'll do is if I can maybe entertain questions after each one.
Yes.
So I've tried to lay it out as clearly as I can, but I'm sure that there will be questions, and I know Mr. Jeleno can help me with some of the specifics around scheduling or things like that people might have questions about.
Amy?
So what's the trade-off with kids take, I think it's a great idea, but they take health, what are they not going to take from it?
Mr. Jeleno, why don't you step to that? Because the middle school, we have to remember, has this interesting schedule of the maroon and gold day piece. And so what Greg is going to tell you is that he had room for growth in terms of coursework available to 7th grade students. And this actually fits pretty nicely within that scheme. So Greg, would you just talk about what students might give up in order to have this additional health class?
Yes, students shouldn't have to give up anything. Maybe at worst case scenario, a student that may have amistades as well as maybe a band and orchestra, they may have to give up a every other day study hall, or so they only have it every other day instead of an everyday study hall. That's worst case, but it doesn't affect many students. The vast majority of our students in 7th grade, we actually struggle to make sure they have enough electives so they're not taking what I call too many study halls. So this actually helps our schedule in 7th grade.
So they'll be replacing study hall?
Yes, for lack of a better way of putting it, yes, that's correct.
Other questions?
So you're saying at worst, they would give up that every other day study hall. They might have it on
Correct.
gold days, but not maroon days.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
Other questions or comments? Yeah, I think I'm glad you asked the question, Amy, because personally, I've never been a fan, and I know there's a lot of parents who aren't huge fans of 2 study halls in middle school.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of sometimes difficult that they don't necessarily have the work that keeps them engaged for 2 study halls. So I think that's a really good solution. Now, will there be any challenges around separating out the curriculum? Do you see it being a hybrid between 6th and 8th standards?
I don't think it'll be a challenge. My plan is if the board would approve this, is I would we'd immediately look for a 7th grade health teacher, but then the idea would be is to get our 2 6th grade science teachers who do the health component there, Dan Riesgraff, who does it in 8th grade, and then our new hire together to kind of do a scope and sequence between 6th and 8th grade to see what makes sense.
Excellent, thank you. Amy?
Is it a semester-long class or is it a year-long class?
It's every other day, all year.
Wait.
Yep.
Other questions about the health position? Okay.
And what I really appreciate is that this proposal came out of some real work that Greg did with his staff to look into saying, what's the best way to deliver the social emotional instruction? And that, I think that goes to show the trusting relationship that Greg has developed with his staff, because this putting together of 3 different needs was born out of those kinds of conversations. I really appreciate Greg's work and engaging his staff in what would work the best for our school, making sure we have the most consistent social emotional health instruction, as well as taking some care of some other, I think, really important needs. So thanks, Greg. Then the second request that I have for next school year is a 1.0 FTE addition to the contingency fund. And just to remind you what the contingency fund is that we established the contingency fund probably a decade ago, maybe even a little bit longer, as a way to help us address specific class size issues, especially right near the beginning of the school year when we have students who enroll in August and maybe a particular class section might need an additional section so that we can mitigate the number of students in each class. It could be that we have, as it always seems to happen, a number of students move into one grade at one elementary building like we had last summer where we needed to add a section of 5th grade at Sibley School. And so a couple of things that have also happened over the years with contingency is the fact that we have used it for things other than direct class size reduction. I'm going to just explain what I mean by that. If you remember when we transitioned from the legacy compañeros approach, where it was 2 teachers sharing the compañeros class, we moved to that self-contained approach. This would be 7 years ago now, 8 years ago now. In order to sunset the 2 programs at Greenvale Park and at Bridgewater, we assigned some contingency funding to help sunset those additional FTE that were still needed at Bridgewater and at Greenvale Park until the new program took full root after the first group had gotten through 5 years. So what that opened the door to is sometimes, not every year, but from time to time, we'll have something really great, a really interesting or great opportunity come to us later in the budget cycle that we may not be able to fit into the regular general fund budget because we're too far down the path, but where we then, as an administrative team, determined that contingency funding would be something that could help us get it started. One example of this is the ADSYS programming that I know that you've seen some presentations on. As you know, whenever you're making application to the state, like we did for ADSYS funding, they don't operate necessarily on our budget timeline. And so as you know, the application came out later in the year. I don't think it was even released till March. And so then by the time we were granted the dollars, which remember it's essentially kind of a matching program where the state will give you 55% of the money and you have to come up with 45% of the money. That's the split. Now, when we first got into it, it was 60-40. It was a little bit, but of course the state can always modify it. And of course that alternative delivery of specialized instruction, instructional services, as we've seen, has got some really great results. And it has done some good class size pieces because there are students who are involved in ADSYS who are in smaller classes. But that did not provide us the same flexibility then when we chose to allocate the contingency in that way to respond to some larger classes, specifically at the secondary level at the beginning of the year. So I've talked with our administrative team and have initially said, you know, we are no longer going to use contingency funding to support a really great program like that. We will just have to we'll have to say, okay, well, we're gonna have to either put it into the regular budget late or we're gonna have to wait a year, you know, before we can implement it because the contingency funding, and when you think about our near-term priority of making sure that we develop a long-term solution that allows for reasonable class sizes while maintaining financial stability, the contingency program is essential to that because once we spend contingency on hotspot class size issues, it comes back to the general fund budget at the end of the year and we look at it fresh. So there are less tails to that investment. But if we could increase the contingency fund by 1.0 FTE, so we're going to take away the ability or the opportunity to use it to supplant other general fund dollars for specialized programs, and we have 4.0 FTE in the contingency fund. What that will do is that will allow us to address class size issues at both the elementary level, which we know we have a couple of grade levels that we're going to need to address in the next couple of years, and then also at the secondary level. We have talked for quite a while about the large, we used to refer to as the bubble class, right? Going into, they'll be juniors next year. And Mr. Jeleno started to talk to me last year about saying, you know, remember how we had that very large class a few years ago? We've got one that's sneaking up on that same size. And wouldn't you know, when you look at one of the latest enrollment reports, that class is only 8 students in 8th grade. That 8th grade class is only 8 students behind the current sophomore class who will be juniors next year. So by adding 1 FT to the contingency fund, we provide an opportunity to make sure we can mitigate full class kinds of contingency that we need at elementary school level, while also providing the opportunity to address specific class sections issues at the high school, which are typically done through overloads, as you know. So it provides us the greatest amount of flexibility to address the class size issue that we have clearly heard from our community through the strategic planning process and multiple times through our thought exchange processes that we've used with the community. Adding to the contingency does not get at the core issue of class size in terms of the work group that we're looking at putting together. But what it does is it does allow us to make sure that we are addressing it on the case-by-case basis as we need to while we develop that long-term strategy. And again, the great thing about the contingency fund, if we don't need to use it all, we are conditioning our administrative team that if we don't need all 4 FTE one year, that's fine. We don't spend all 4 FTE. And of course, it comes back to the district at the end of the year, and then we make fresh decisions for the next year about what the best way to invest that is. So I had asked Val to give us an anticipated cost on that, which is $65,000 to add to the contingency. And then in addition, I had a question about, okay, so the ADSYS was coming out of contingency last year. It's going to go into the regular part of the general fund budgeting process this year, and what would that cost? So Val's got that number for us now.
Yep, similar to the numbers that are on here, we typically cost a 1.0 FTE around 78 to 85,000, depending on what kind of benefits the person would potentially take. So that is likely what would be.
And in this case, I'm pretty sure that the ADSYS FT that we're paying for is actually divided out amongst a number of people, because very few people actually have a full-time job that is ADSYS. So it's that we're just using that as an estimate across the number of people in the district that are doing ADSYS related work. So again, what I think is this contingency fund piece goes back to what we want to make sure we have is flexibility in addressing those class size issues that are really important to our community. And it provides us an opportunity to do something about it with the fewest tails possible in terms of giving us the greatest flexibility.
Okay, great. Questions, comments, board members? Jeff?
That FTE, I mean, with shifts and lanes, it must be different across the board, isn't it? I mean,
It can vary. Yep.
Val, could you turn your microphone on?
Oh, sorry. Yes, it can vary depending on the step and lanes and where they're at. And it also can widely vary depending on the benefits that they elect. But it's the 78,000 is an average if I look across all of our teachers in the district and where they're at with benefits. It's kind of just an average across all of those groups.
And it might shock you that Val's a little conservative on that, right?
Yeah.
So the fact is, what she does, Jeff, is she takes when she looks at the average teacher and the total cost for that, she is using that as our estimate. Now, a lot of times it comes in less than that. And from time to time, it'll come in a little bit more than that. But I think that if we were to look back at it, that estimate usually is on the high side.
and do you know, I mean, isn't it like
No.
about 40% of the teachers and people in the district are longer tenured than, I mean, does that vary? Is that an average within a school district of how many people are, you know, maxed out in a sense on the shifts and lanes?
I'm not sure on a comparison to other districts, but roughly 42% of our staff are on the top step.
There's just a good question about the contingency fund, why that's at $65,000 as opposed to the $85,000. And the reason is that contingency fund, that addition to the contingency fund isn't one person. It's not typically someone that we generally hire, you know, straight out in a 1.0 FTE. That 1.0 FTE will most likely be divided up amongst several teachers because, especially at the secondary level, that is mostly done with overload. So as I had asked Val, that's not, so these people already are having typically benefits and those things. So that's an estimate that is generated upon when we spread those 5 sections out amongst different people, what's the estimated cost.
Other questions? Amy?
I think this is a newbie question. Where does the money come from?
So this is money that's general fund money that we budget for the purposes of contingency. So we set the money aside in the general fund budget so that we are able to respond more quickly. You've already authorized the administration to make those FTE additions if needed. If you get the MSBA board clippings, if you've signed up for that yet, once you hit August and September, you'll see a story every single day about an action that a school board took to be able to hire new people to address class size issues. There are quite a few boards that, rather than using a contingency strategy, they wait and then they have to wait until after the school year starts to hire someone and come and address those class size issues. The contingency fund was a brainstorm, I believe, of Dr. Richardson in terms of, we know that we're going to need this from time to time. We'd like you to pre-approve some positions for us so that we can have the flexibility to address that before the school year starts. And again, if we don't need it all, we won't use it all. But it's a more proactive approach to addressing class size as opposed to the reactive approach that we see a lot of districts use.
So will these positions become available immediately, or will it be next school year?
So they will be for this is for the 2017-18 school year.
Other questions or comments? Helen?
I just have a comment because Dr. Hillman answered many of my questions during my update, but I really appreciate how you put the strategic plan alignment in proposing this to the board. I really like seeing that, and it keeps it front and center to us, so I appreciate that.
Well, when we adopted the strategic plan, we asked 188 people who came to invest their time in giving us their feedback and all the time that we've used looking at thought exchange and the work that you did as a board to sift those priorities to the top. I think it's really important that the strategic plan guides our work, and how we are showing that to you is by trying to integrate that into nearly everything that we bring to you, because that is the direction you've asked us to go, and we're trying to go after that as you have directed. So I appreciate you acknowledging that.
Other questions or comments? Yeah, I just wanted to echo what, oh, I'm sorry, did I miss someone? No, okay, I just didn't want to speak before everyone had an opportunity, but I want to echo what Ellen said. I just love this, and I know you came forward when Hope Langston's position was, you were able to make a move with Hope Langston's position, and you framed it in this way, and I just think it's really great, and I think it keeps all decisions very student-centered and very focused on where we're headed, so it's really wonderful. I just love it. One question I had, though, so if we had a scenario where you had to add a FTE to an elementary school and you had overload situations, that would that strain that contingency budget?
Well, if we end up having a scenario where the contingency fund gives us the opportunity to address the first 4 FTE of contingency needs that we need, it used to be 3. And so, as you recall, when we had to come to you this fall because we didn't have enough left in contingency to address an elementary class size issue. Should we have, and remember, we're up 100 students over a year ago, so it's logical that we'll have some contingency needs when you go up that many students in 1 year. And of course, they don't all evenly distribute across all grade levels. They tend to congregate in specific grade levels. So the fact is that by adding one, that should provide us additional flexibility. Can I promise you that it will prevent us from coming to you for additional FTE if we see that kind of continued increase? I can't promise that, but this gets us way out ahead of it. And also, as you know, we analyze every year the FTE, especially at our elementary schools, and make sure, while we're generally a solid 4-section building at each elementary school, there are times where we end up with one grade level that's in 5 sections, and sometimes we have just a smaller class of the building that ends up in 3 sections. And so we look at that across the board. We try to make the efficiencies while keeping those class sizes as reasonable as possible, considering the space constraints, that the buildings have. There could be a scenario where a building might use another section but does not have the room for it, and so of course that prevents us from looking at that, and then we try to address that class size in a different way through some other kind of push-in services or flexible grouping. But at the same time, I can't promise it's not going to that we're not going to have to come back for something, but at the same time, I do think it's going to really give us a lot of headway on it.
Excellent. So if there's no other further questions or comments at this point, we'll move on, and we will come back. This will be on the agenda for our next board meeting in March 27th, board meeting in which it will be an item for individual action. So in the meantime, if you have any questions, you can contact Dr. Himmler to have those answered prior to having to approve this. Okay, excellent. So we will move on to our next item for discussion, which is the proposed 17-18 operating capital and long-term facilities maintenance budget presentation. And here tonight, Val Mertzler, Director of Finance.
Good evening. So I am here to present the proposed capital and long-term facilities maintenance budget, which is a little different this year than in prior years. We're doing it a little bit earlier, so we can really make sure we're getting ahead and able to get bids and things before everybody's all filled up and wants to charge us an extra fee and all those things for short scheduling. So, and it's also different because the long-term facilities maintenance is new, and so it'll look a little different this year. So capital is now 4 different revenue streams. Operating capital is a levy aid formula that's basically a dollar amount per pupil adjusted for the average age of our buildings. The lease levy is money that we can only levy for certain leases that we have. We have the authority to lease up to about $900,000, and we typically have levied about $330,000. Our capital levy is the voter-approved $750,000, and now our long-term facility maintenance revenue, which replaces what used to be health and safety and deferred maintenance, that has kind of pooled those together into one revenue stream. So the capital budget is included in the general fund. MDE does require us to present it separately, and it's a little bit easier to, because of the restrictions and things, it's easier to talk about it separately. So each of the revenue sources has a specific list of items that we can purchase with it. So it is restrictive, and they are tracked in a separate fund balance category. So we cannot use the funds to supplement the general fund or pay for utilities and those sorts of things. It is a separate restricted fund, or account, I should say, not fund. There is a portion of the operating capital that is prioritized each year by the capital committee. We meet typically in December. In November, I kind of project what the operating capital revenue will look like, along with kind of the specific allocations that we take out of there, and then whatever's left, that committee comes together and comes to consensus on what the priority items are for the next school year. So as far as the breakout, this year, long-term facilities maintenance is now actually our largest source at just over $1 million. That is a increase over last year. It is the tiered 3-year phase-in of that revenue. And in total, the long-term facilities maintenance is about $600,000 more than what we were seeing with the health and safety and deferred maintenance on an annual basis. So providing a lot more opportunity to help prevent further erosion of our facilities. The operating capital is our next largest, followed by the capital levy and lease levy. So we're looking at just shy of $3 million for our total capital budget. The projected expenditures, the leased facility to lease levy, we obviously put those expenditures against the revenue, and that also includes the lease purchase of Sibley. We do not lease levy that, but we do code it to the capital budget. And then some of the other allocations that we have annually taken out is network administration, There is a school and program allocation, so each of the buildings has a discretionary amount of capital that they get to spend. We have an amount for textbooks and digital curriculum. The other leases would encompass all of our iPad leases and other things that we've committed to taking out of capital. And then the capital committee recommendations. So we had about $500,000 that the capital committee was able to prioritize and choose the projects for next year. And then the long-term facilities maintenance is about $850,000. So about $2.7 million in total expenditures projected for next year. And part of the capital committee recommendation, I had a kind of a summarized list in the narrative that you had in your packet. There were a few things like a new dump truck, new lawnmower, surprising how expensive those things are for a school district, a portable lactation area, some cafeteria tables, new field goal posts at Memorial Field, and an amount for some staff computer replacements. I just wanted to highlight that there is, and Kim's actually here and she's going to give you some information. There is a conversation that we went into about whether or not we should consider staff laptops or computer desktops. The cost of was pretty similar for the upcoming year, and so Kim will share a little bit of information about that, and then we'll talk about the rest of it. So.
All right, so as Val said, we entered into a conversation through that capital recommendation process about replacing staff computers. Try not to make a lot of noise here. And that conversation was really born out of requests by teachers for laptops that we've had over the past few years. And in the past, we've said no to many of those. We have approved some of them with funding from building capital funds that are already in place. But the reason for saying no to them is really not that we don't want to provide resources to our teachers, for sure. It's that we have had no precedent for that. It's difficult to determine the criteria for a teacher receiving a laptop or not receiving a laptop when we haven't had that precedent. And in the past, I think it's been cost prohibitive to move to laptops instead of desktops. And so I left one of our capital meetings at the high school feeling just uneasy about some requests and that weren't going to be approved. And I was thinking, what if we could make this work? And one of those near-term priorities in our strategic plan, again, is spaces that are modern, innovative, creative, and flexible. And thinking about what are we doing to support that and what could we be doing? We do need a significant number of staff computer replacements this year. It's 145 computers for staff. And so that's moving into a place where you go, do we want to enter into a new purchase of all desktops that are going to be here then for a while, or do we want to look at something that could be a solution moving forward for all licensed staff? And so I went to Val and to Matt and I said, what's the financial feasibility of this if we were going to look into it? And that was the first step. We then went to District Tech Steering Committee. I emailed and said, I have this conversation I want to bring to you, and we'll need to determine what we want to do at that capital recommendation committee. And that the Tech Steering Committee said, let's approve funding, either for replacing desktops or for entering into a lease of laptops. So that was done. And then we moved on to communicating with staff and getting feedback from licensed staff on this potential shift. And so the Tech Steering Committee approved kind of my process of emailing all staff, holding informational meetings in each of our schools, spending a full day on site in each of our schools to hear from teachers, and then following up with a survey to all of our licensed staff. The survey responses came back pretty highly in favor of laptops and also highly in favor of the Mac platform. And so across the district, that was very true. I can share those numbers with you at some point too. So that's the kind of process that we went through. The potential for a lease of laptops does a couple of things for us. It evens out the spending for our staff computers year to year, so we don't end up with some years where it was really a high number of computers being replaced. Like I said, it's about 145 this year, and next year we'd be looking at about 75. So it kind of gets those ebbs and flows evened out. It also gives us a nice cycle. This would be a 4-year lease, and so to update computers on a regular basis. Some of the computers that we're updating this year are from 2009, and they are needing to be replaced. There's not a question that we have to do something. And this would make it so that we could make a change for everyone all at the same time, basically. It would keep our teachers up to date with their computers, and also in that projected cost of a lease, which I'll bring the full lease to you next board meeting too, we included an extended warranty on them, which we don't currently have for repair and such. So there is some cost benefit or some cost offsetting to some of the things that we already do, also in terms of the existing, the value at the end of a lease. So I'm happy to entertain questions. I don't know if we want to do that now or if you want to finish your.
Questions board members have, either for Val on, do you want me to finish
Yeah, well,
presentation?
I think we should have Val finish.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Let's.
I'll
have Val,
stay.
And then we can have board members ask questions on.
Okay, so I just wanted to have her give you a little context about that. The capital budget's not being approved or asked to be approved until the next meeting, and Kim will bring a potential lease to the next meeting. Either way, the funding is part of the budget. The choice of whether we do laptops or not is a decision point at that meeting. So, but I just wanted to give you some information about that and context. Some of the long-term facility maintenance projects that we have scheduled for next year are some asbestos abatement at Sibley. There's a pretty significant retrofit lighting project at the middle school. Some flooring replacement in various buildings. Sibley is going to get some new counters and cabinets, some parking repairs, and then the middle school is getting a sidewalk repair. That's just a handful that I pulled out. There's a significant list, as you can imagine, with $850,000 of projects. Jim will be very, very busy taking care of all that and coordinating that. So overall, the increase in funding has allowed for a lot of flexibility and proactive approach to maintaining our facilities. So when you pull it all together, I put the operating capital and long-term facilities separately because they do each have their own fund balance. So the operating capital, we do have about 500, and I'm projecting that we will end with 572,000 in our fund balance this year. It'll be about just shy of 1.9 million in revenue and 1.86 million for expenditures. So increasing that to about 600,000, which was our original fund balance goal. The long-term facilities maintenance is starting this year with about 346,000. That is the deferred maintenance fund balance currently. That will get rolled into the long-term facilities new restricted category since those were all pulled together. The health and safety fund balance is not going to be rolled in. MDE has decided that will get absorbed into the general fund. So whether that's a positive or a negative, it'll likely be a negative. That will be absorbed at the end of the 18-19 school year into the general fund. So I've excluded that on here since that's no longer part of the capital formula. Total revenue is just over $1 million and 851,000 in expenditures. So we are projecting to end next year about 650,000. And with the addition of the long-term facility maintenance fund balance, we had set the $600,000 fund balance goal as a worst case scenario if a boiler blows up and we needed to replace it. With the addition of the long-term facilities, that's really a cost that we would code to long-term facilities now. So I don't feel that a $600,000 fund balance for operating capital is necessary. I am recommending that we would go to about a $200,000 fund balance. It still gives us some flexibility and the ability to respond to things that we may have not anticipated. But I would like to see the long-term facility maintenance at 600,000 for sure. I anticipate that we'll grow the long-term facility maintenance fund balance significantly higher than that because we have the ability to do that and can do larger roofing projects and things like that. So if there isn't an immediate need for projects, we would like to probably just increase that fund balance to offset some of the larger costs that we know we have upcoming in the next 5 to 10 years. The capital fund balance, the operating capital, that's $400,000 that we could effectively spend. I don't anticipate just spending it next year. We will be cognizant of that and look for projects that are one-time things and are good for the district. So we won't just be spending that to spend it. And then the other thing that I just wanted to comment about was the capital committee process. That's a really great committee to be a part of, to watch everybody come together and provide trade-offs and say, well, my building got this, so why don't we prioritize this project this year? And it's a great collaboration. They did really focus on things that would not be or would be movable or replaceable, or wouldn't if we had anything moving forward with a building project and those sorts of things, so that it wasn't a wasteful expenditure. So just wanted to throw that in there as well. Picture of the middle school work that some of the capital funding provided. So I will take any questions you have specifically about the capital budget, or as well about anything regarding the laptops.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Questions board members have? Rob?
Yep. Okay. Since you ended with that picture of the work by the middle school, I was thinking about, I mean, some of that was work that the city did, and it was like a shared, there were some shared costs. Are there, as the city continues to look at that stretch along 246, are there any other opportunities or potential expenditures regarding those crossings that are shared with the city that we might not know about, or that?
I would say that there's always potential for things we don't know about. And I think that you've sat in on a few meetings regarding that, but I think it's more of them asking if we would like to contribute versus it being a forced contribution. But do you have anything you want to?
Well, Jim Colseth has been our designee on the 246 task force. So Jim, why don't you come to this is a guy who was up at 1 o'clock in the morning plowing snow last night, so we'll cut him a little slack here. But the fact is that Jim has sat in on most of those meetings, and he and I attended the public meeting where they really went through a number of the options. So Jim, do you want to highlight just a couple of pieces there?
Well, yeah, they did. The city did accept the engineering survey. What they had done was take some video and car counts and things like that, and offer some options to the city for the 246 Jefferson intersection, Jefferson Parkway, and is it Jefferson Lane by the hospital? That was another intersection that they had looked at.
By Alina, okay, by Jefferson Road, okay.
Jefferson Road, pardon me. And part of that too was something that they threw out there was a change on Highway 246 at the middle school entrance. And, you know, right now there are no plans to move forward with that option at this time. And at this point, I believe the city council is still in the discussion stage of what plan of action they are going to move forward with.
And I think that being said, Rob, I think the key thing is that we've had a really good working relationship with the city administrator, with the city engineering department through the project that we did at Northfield Middle School last year that was a long time coming in terms of installing the crosswalk, the extra lane on our property, the beacons that have really made a big difference. So anytime that we can work with the city, if the city were to come to us and say, you know, would you be able to do some cost sharing with us? We have a limit to the amount that we can obviously cost share. We don't have the ability to necessarily bond for that without a voter approval kind of piece. But we've been good stewards, and you know they have been accepting of. I believe that we contributed $20,000 to the crosswalk project. We would of course look at ways that we could share the cost with the city for things that directly benefit us within our financial means. And I think that that's the key thing. And I know that the city understands that as well. But I think the key thing is that we've got a very good collaborative relationship between the two entities' administrations, And of course, if they have a proposal for us, we'll certainly consider it, again, within the financial means that we have.
And I know the city is also working with the state and with MnDOT to provide some funding options as well. So it wouldn't be
And we're
strictly a
still
burden
talking
for the
turn
city.
back and all those kinds of things too, so.
Yeah, there's many options that they're still looking at and considering, so.
It's a great question, though. Other questions or comments? Rob?
Actually, this is actually for Kim, I guess, about, as I was walking through Greenvale last week, there was talk about this computer lab that could be used as a classroom or an extra room for some other purpose than a computer lab if they had Chromebooks on a cart. So is that a possible future expense that they would be getting rid of?
Yep. Chromebook cart is a relatively inexpensive expenditure as far as technology costs go. Sibley did get a Chromebook cart at the beginning of this year based on some capital expenditures coming in a little bit less, and we had a little wiggle room in the budget when they added that 5th grade section and we took a computer lab out, and that has been working really well there. So it was kind of a nice testing ground for having one computer lab and one Chromebook cart that is mobile to the rooms. Greenville Park does need a new lab, and that cost can be offset if we were to enter into a laptop lease. We would be able to take existing computers that were purchased within the last year and build a lab out of those. And so they would have the same lab. They wouldn't gain that space in that sense. I actually haven't yet heard any talk at Greenville about, I have mentioned that we could potentially replace the computers or use a Chromebook cart there, but I haven't heard talk on a direction that people would like to move there yet.
And I think, Rob, that, we, used that strategy out of necessity at Sibley last year, and our understanding so far is that it's gone, very well to this point.
Yep.
And actually, I think that as we've talked about for several years, I think that computer labs are in their waning years, and they're not quite there yet because there are still some pieces that we need to have that physical lab space for. Unfortunately, yet with some of the state testing and some other things, we were able to do some testing on Chromebooks and those pieces, but there are still some applications that we need that at least one computer lab for. And at Greenville Park, one of the key things is that, of course, the other computer lab that's not a self-enclosed classroom is one that's in the media center. We have that same issue at Bridgewater. And so the question would just be really for those buildings thinking about how they use those computer labs, and if they are to take those other enclosed classrooms back, what are the activities that they're now going to do in an open media center where that kind of noise and that kind of cross traffic could be an impediment. It doesn't mean that we don't do it, it just simply means that that's some questions that we need to ask. But do I think that that's the future between individual student devices and Chromebooks? Without a doubt, there's going to be those pieces that we continue down that road.
And also we are doing state testing this year on Chromebooks, both at Bridgewater and at Sibley, and on iPads at the middle school.
Amy?
This is for Kimberly. So would all of the computers for the faculty be leased at once, or would there be a rollout of the process?
If we were to move to this type of a lease, we could lease for the entire licensed staff all at the same time.
So then what happens to the old computers that are all varying ages?
Well, like I was saying, 145 of them do need to be replaced already. So those we would not maintain. The other computers that would move from licensed staff classrooms would go either to that Greenville Park lab or into office spaces where some of those 145 computers that need replacing are in our offices, and offices are not included in a licensed staff lease. We would maintain any computer that was in good working order to be placed in another spot. Our special education department also stands to benefit from this, mostly because our special ed department does purchase laptops right now for many of their teachers, not all of them, many of them, and they're aging, and special ed has had to use their funding to purchase those because it's not what we provide to the general education classroom. This would update all of those, which would be nice. And then special education classrooms also oftentimes have student computers for students to work at a desktop computer in the classroom, which is not something we provide in any of our mainstream general ed classrooms either. And those computers are also aging, so we could take some computers that are purchased in the last couple of years and place them in areas where students could really benefit from them.
Other questions? No.
I want to address a community concern that I've had from several people regarding one line item, and that is the expenditures of proposed expenditure for 2017-18 of $851,000. I've had comments to the line that the reason we need to replace the two buildings that we've talked about is because we've been derelict in maintenance of them. And I would say that with 35 acres of building footprint, $851,000 is probably not insignificant to the maintenance that we need to do, and it certainly doesn't reflect our ambivalence to the needs of the building to keep them safe and to keep them an appropriate learning center for world-class students. Out of the editorial.
Other questions or comments? I had a question for Val on the health and safety. I know we're kind of just winding that line item down, and you talked about it being a negative effect to the general fund budget when that happens 18-19. Do you anticipate that to be a significant hit, or is there any way to?
Right now, I think it's sitting at about $150,000 negative. I don't anticipate it to sway much from that.
And let's explain the negative, please, because that's something we don't normally like to hear, but health and safety funding is a very individualized animal where we do not get reimbursement until sometimes several years later. So could you please explain that? Because I think the average person would say, well, negative $150,000, that doesn't sound very good.
Doesn't sound like good stewardship.
That's exactly right.
So the health and safety program as it was basically a three-year reimbursement process. We would put basically our projects into the health and safety system that MDE operated. They would fund most of them a year behind, and then we had to go and reconcile it at the end of the year and make sure that everything that we had coded to health and safety, that we actually got revenue for, but because everything was so far behind, it didn't always line up exactly, and there were huge swings from year to year. So if we had a really significant asbestos abatement project and we put in $100,000 for a project, that didn't always line up with when we were getting the revenue and those sorts of things. But I think over the course of time, because the revenue and expenditures for MDE, they looked back basically to the dawn of time. So I think all the way back to 1999, they looked at your total revenue and total expenditures that were in this system that they operated. And I think over the course of time, I think there were things that maybe just got coded to health and safety but not appropriately reconciled, or the funding didn't line up with the years and those sorts of things. So to say I'm thrilled that the health and safety program is gone is an understatement, because it was quite an undertaking to monitor that, and the adjustments that would come on the levy, up to 3 years later were always kind of a problem. So, but right now it is about $150,000, and I will include that as part of our general fund budget.
Okay, great.
So.
Thank you.
Yep.
And then I just had one question, or one comment on the long-term facilities maintenance revenue, and I know we've made several comments over the course of that legislative decision to put that in place, and how we felt like they really got it right, and we can see the benefits of that. And so I just wanted to mention that there was some rumblings at the state capitol that that might be some low-hanging fruit that maybe some of our legislators might go after in terms of some potential cuts. So we'll have to keep our eye on that and hope that they realize there's a strong push, obviously, and I have to thank Dr. Hillman because he immediately, as a result of an action alert, contacted the legislators and really gave a case study of our Bridgewater piece and how beneficial that was to our taxpayers when we were able to finance the bond through that long-term facilities maintenance revenue. So we hope that many districts like ourselves, which we know are out there and benefiting substantially from that revenue. So we hope that that particular thought will fall by the wayside.
And there was another piece that came out today that discussion has ceased at this
Good.
point.
Good.
It certainly could come back forward, but I had heard through another action alert saying that the action that people took in contacting their legislatures had dissuaded the House, where that discussion was coming out of the House, it dissuaded the House from continuing down that path. So of course we'll keep a close eye on it, but that long-term facilities maintenance revenue is something that the state legislature has gotten right. It's very advantageous for us, and it's also very advantageous for many school districts across the state, especially in smaller districts who have really struggled to maintain their facilities. And it's a great piece of good stewardship because there are specific rules of what you can use the money for. And as you're seeing tonight, we're actually going to build a fund balance, and that's one of the genius parts of it, is that it's one of those rare areas that the department allows you to carry over money and save for a project so that you can do it without having to go for an interest-bearing project or those kinds of things. So it really is a great program that former Senator Dahl was one of the chief authors on, and we've obviously really put it in good utilization already, committing some of our money to the Bridgewater roof to pay that. We're able to pay that off using money from the state as opposed to having to do it on the levy side. It's a piece that we could certainly levy for, but we're not having to do so because we have long-term facilities maintenance. So,
excellent. Well, thank you, Dr. Hillman, because obviously you weighed in and it had an impact on our legislators. So we appreciate that. So any final questions or comments? Okay. So you will be back at the next meeting. We'll formally approve.
Yeah.
So in the meantime, again, if you have any questions, contact Dr. Hillman or Yvette. Okay, so our final item for discussion, we wanted to take a few moments and just talk about some follow-up to our March 7th work session. Dr. Hillman.
So what I just wanted to be able to do this evening is to be able to, after you've had a chance to reflect on our March 7th work session in terms of continuing to discuss the master facilities plan that was adopted last November and looking at any determination if there's any kind of pieces that we're interested in looking at. In the packet, I did include some additional paperwork from Ellers Incorporated, some questions that had come forward at the work session, specifically looking at some of the tax impact. And then in the table file, you also received some additional information there as well that was specific to Board Member Gorwitz's question around current tax impact that school taxes have on average homeowners. So those were questions that came out of the work session. That was our second work session, and we've spent so far 4 hours really deliberating and looking at the master facilities plan and determining what the appropriate next steps are. So as you've had a chance to reflect on our previous 2 work sessions, we wanted to open it for discussion. If there's additional data that you want, other questions that you have, maybe we need to talk about the possibility of some other kind of additional work session that we could iron out some additional pieces, but wanted to offer the opportunity for you to ask questions or discuss anything that has been lingering with you since the last work session.
So maybe I could just jump in with a little summary of maybe where I felt we landed or where we left the board work session. And so I think there was consensus around looking at the numbers and realizing that if we were to go for a levy, that the $470 per student would be the area we need to go to provide the financial stability that we would need to have to continue to support current programming. Then what I understood we were interested in doing as next step would be to begin framing some scenarios around the ballot questions and how those could look. The $470 levy question, and then obviously how the questions would relate to the 2 building proposals. Thirdly, we were interested in wanting to get feedback from district stakeholder groups. We talked about the district finance committee and the facilities committee. So those were the sort of some of the takeaways that I had, and would like anyone else to add to that as well. And so possibly as we get the stakeholder information, and Dr. Hillman has had an opportunity to frame some of the ballot questions for our review, wanted to just discuss with board members if they still feel that the work session is a good way to continue to review how we would move forward. And then we could talk about some possible timelines to either review this information at a regular board meeting or at a work session with maybe possible timeline of mid to end of April. So that's kind of the summary that I took from the work session. So I'd want to definitely have discussion and comments and or any corrections to my summary from board members. So are there any questions or comments? Ellen?
So when I thought your summary was excellent as to where I understood we ended. What I'd really like to hear a little bit about is we had talked about the 2 advisory committees and understanding a little bit more the expectations of what those advisory committees might be coming back to the board with.
Okay.
So typically when we've used those advisory committees in this kind, there's nothing really quite like this, but in similar circumstances where we have a potential concept that we're looking for feedback, how those advisors, now we have a history with the Finance Advisory Committee, the Facilities Advisory Committee is new, so this will be their maiden voyage in terms of that. But what we've typically done is we've used it as an initial sounding board. So certainly not the last step, because as we go back in history, we've had 25 public meetings around the master facilities plan. We've had 3 thought exchange pieces that really have included a number of pieces, one specific to the facilities plan. But as you have started to narrow the concepts and start to narrow your preference for what we might do, we would share with them a high-level overview of the work sessions. Share with them the potential tax impact documents that we have had Ellers prepare around the varying options that we're still considering. Between Val and I, we would be presenting, and Jim Colseth, we would be talking through the projects. We'd be talking about the tax impact, the current tax impact that we have on the current levies and bonds that are out there. Explain those processes. Ask for roundtable discussion, with folks who are on those committees. And then one of the pieces that we always do after those committees is we also send out a follow-up survey, because of course people the next day or the day after think of something else. And so again, that concept of roundtable discussion in terms of getting their feedback on what parts of the various options make sense and what don't, then asking for their follow-up in a survey a couple of days later, so that if they've had any other reflections, or if there's someone who wasn't comfortable sharing a point of view at the meeting, that they have an opportunity to share that. We would be able to share all of that feedback with you, either in a work session or during a regular board meeting, as just the next step of kind of narrowing what our thoughts are on these projects, or the potential projects, and the potential levy, to make sure that our programming is in place for the reasonable foreseeable future. Does that answer your question?
Yes, go ahead.
So I guess that does answer my question. I guess one of the things I've been trying to think about is, with the advisory committees and their 2 different sort of roles, the finance piece and the facilities piece, is we had looked at the levy piece and sort of just started to get a consensus around what we need for our programming. But then in terms of the building piece, if they came back, we've talked about the different impact of the 2 different pieces, or the pieces together. Would they come back with a perspective on that? I guess I hear there'll be a roundtable discussion, but I'm not sure, ultimately it's before the board then to make some decisions. So I'm just not sure if are they going to be weighing in about specifically on the facilities and their perspective on what the communities can bear and
Well, I think that we've had really honest discussion about the fact that we don't believe we can do one without the other, in terms of our commitment to making sure that our educational programming is as solid and as predictable as we possibly can, given we're almost getting to 30 years of chronic underfunding of the per pupil basic formula by the state. things like the withholding that the feds have done over the past several years in terms of to balance their budget. So us continuing to make sure that we fill in those gaps to make sure that our programming, the educational programming, stays strong. I don't see how we can, even with the facilities group, I don't see how we can present the one without the other. Because I think that we need to get their feedback on, okay, yes, you're the facilities advisory committee, but in order for us to think about any kind of bond proposal, we need to make sure that our local funding is as strong as it can be and as predictable as it can be for the next 10 years. Because what we don't want to do is we don't want to do the mistake that some other communities have inadvertently made where they go for a bond issue, and even during their campaign, they'll say, well, we're going to need some operating dollars from you in a few years, and then they go for the operating dollars after they've passed a bond issue, and then you see schools where they've opened something and yet they've had significant reductions in staff. That doesn't make any sense. So I think both committees, even though they have different pieces, I understand that might not be a question we typically would ask the facilities committee, but I think that's going to be something we're going to have to ask in this scenario because I think the two are intertwined, and you have all said the direction that you've given me is that yes, they are intertwined because we need to make sure that we have that protected and predictable funding.
Great. Excellent question. Other questions or comments, additional information other than what we had discussed? Jeff?
Yeah, I thought our work session was very productive. It's just a matter, I think, again, framing the question to people so they can understand it. And I guess the big question would be why for the taxpayer. Say, well, why do you need a new levy? Why do you need new schools? And I think that, to me, when Chris was here, and we've been talking about this for a long time, and I think it's, I don't know if the word unfortunate is right, but I mean, to have a new high school, to have something different, and I'm out of the school that 50 years in a building is good to have service from, and 50 to 60 years, well, we're here at 60 years. And again, the most efficient school building here is Longfellow. And why is Longfellow so efficient? Because it's built to be a bomb shelter, and it's a two-story. So, and yeah, we go back to way back when, and thank you for, I was on the board in early 60s, that, you had the foresight to put this school together. I mean, the great gym and a lot of other things, but I mean, yeah, it is a California plan. It was kind of a, even weird, at that time, I think, but I mean, it served us well. It served us well. But, again, do you keep throwing money back into the building that's 60 years old, or do you start building for the 60-year plan? And we talked about this the other night where, why weren't we talking about a high school, earlier, and even 10 years ago? Of course, the timing came from the middle school, and I think that, that's the need at the time. And I mean, I'm out of the school. That would have thought that putting a high school out where the middle school is probably a better idea, but that wasn't the need at the time. So it all comes down to timing. So I mean, I think that a lot more understanding, and I personally need a lot more understanding of some of the why questions. And then when you're looking back at the Greenville versus the high school and whether or not you're going to ask for one versus the other, I think that phrase a very simple question for the total amount. This upcoming, election this fall, and then again on the levy. But it also sounds too that how do you make that decision, or how do you? I mean, you shouldn't say sway the voter, but obviously the programming, in a sense, is more important than the building. So I mean, you kind of, but I think that's kind of swaying a little bit on, maybe one person wanted the building and not the levy. So I think you got to make it real simple for people to understand, and I just think that's a big, bite to take, two of those in one election cycle. But again, if it doesn't go, I think you have to frame it very simply, and then if you didn't get it this fall, you got to ask for the next year, and then I think, again, not have a special election, but then you're off to the presidential year. So, and even on the timing on that, from what I understand, on the construction cost, I mean, it's just what it is. If it's 2-3% every year on a $100 million project, I mean, it's $2 to $3 million, which is a ton of money the longer you wait. One argument, for doing something. I mean, it's always status quo doing something, status quo doing, moving forward. And I just think that, we need to really, as we are, make a big decision on this and keep moving forward, because, we'll be judging what we did 10 years from now. This is the obvious thing. So, but I think we need a work session coming up, and we need to be much more crystallized on what the issues are, what's our big why, and just, move forward with that. And I think we are, moving forward with that, but I think that everybody, and I would say we can take all the data you want, you can do whatever you want, you can munch on that and eat all you want, but each one of the school board members here, you have a seat here. And basically, get the data, get the facts, make your own decision within the best interest of what the future is for the school district and the taxpayer. Because we have to look at that, and not too much of a burden on that, but I think that, again, the longer we wait, but I don't want to necessarily, and I don't want to captivate too much more time here, but I want to pick the position where we're crystallizing, the big why for the levy, against the levy, for the bond, against the bond, so that we can move forward, and then frame that up for the taxpayer. And then however the decision ends up being, the decision, is, and we move forward on that. And if it isn't this election cycle, you're asking again next year, and then you're skipping a year, and then you're asking again the next year. And the final point is, I think too, even if you passed something and you're looking at whatever year it would be, and you're using 18 months, pass it, 18 to plan, 18 to build. So I would use, I'm just saying just off the top, whenever something is passed, 2 years to plan, 2 years to build. So you're looking at something here in 1965, this place was built with 3 additions on it. You're looking at, maybe even if you didn't get it passed, you're out to like 2025 before you'd actually, have a building up, and going. And maybe a couple years before that if things passed right away, but that's 60 years. So you want to, keep throwing money back into something that's 60 years old, or do you want to start over and put money into something you're going to have 60 years from now? So anyway, thanks for.
I appreciate that reflection. That's really important, and that's what we need to hear, because what I'm hearing you say, Jeff, is that, we've talked quite a bit about aligning this discussion with a strategic plan. And if you think about our strategic plan that we worked so hard on this fall, the facilities component was a real critical component. In fact, it was such an important component. You're evaluating beyond whether or not we got it approved or not, in terms of not any projects, but that we have a master facilities plan, that there was a lot of involvement, from the community. So I think the key thing is we can come back and really articulate, I think, a very clear alignment with a strategic plan. I think we can nearly hit all of the components around it, specifically around the spaces that are modern and flexible. And in addition, that career and college readiness piece, because if you think about the proposed Greenvale project, what you're doing is you're really creating the early childhood center. When we talk about doing something about the achievement gap, what we know is if we can stop the achievement gap before it starts, when they get to kindergarten, if we have an opportunity for really high quality early childhood programming, and we are out of space for we have no more space for early childhood programming. So we know that that's only going to become more important. If Cheryl Hall were here, she'll tell you we have the largest number of early childhood special education students identified for next year that she's ever seen in the decade and a half or 20 years she's been with the school district. So going after that piece around that early childhood center and a renovated Greenville Park is a real direct attack and a long-term attack on the achievement gap, because we're providing more space, more services for kids before they get to kindergarten. The new Greenville Park building, and fortunately we have the property, we don't have to have the expense of trying to negotiate a land purchase. There's a lot of districts when they're talking about projects like this, one of the first things they're talking about is, well, we're going to get the land. We are fortunate enough that we don't have to have that particular discussion, because we have enough space on that plot to be able to do a 2-story elementary building and to be able to recapture the current one as a possible early childhood center, which we think would provide a number of different pieces in going after that achievement gap, which is the start of that career and college readiness. And then I think at the high school, I think the question specifically at the high school is exactly as how you framed it, in terms of it's a question of, do we pay it now or do we pay more for it later? We know that this building is in its twilight years. We know that there's $12.5 million worth of deferred maintenance costs that don't even touch a classroom, despite the fact that we've been very diligent in making sure that we keep the building up to date. But at the same time, we are coming to a point in the building's life cycle where some decisions have to be made. And so I think that's the question, is does the board could certainly choose to enact, ask the voters for one or both of these projects now, or we could wait for a period of time. And the construction estimates that Jim is hearing in school construction is 4 to 7% increase each year. So the question is, if we know, what's the most stewardly thing to do? Is the most stewardly thing to do to be honest and transparent with the public and saying, this is what we think we're going to need over the next decade. We would prefer to get the best deal that we possibly can for you. And we believe that we've hit that time frame for that. And then it's simply a question to the community as to whether they agree with that or not. So I think those are some significant, and when we dig deeper into the high school, I think there's also a number of pieces there around career and college readiness in terms of how a newly constructed building, should that be what is decided to do, could really respond to what I think is going to be a continuing changing need for what high schools need to produce for employers and for the skills that they're going to need as they leave the school. And I'm not saying our current space doesn't allow us to do that in some way, shape, or form, but my hope is the next generation of school construction, specifically at the high school level, is one that is forward-thinking enough that the building can reinvent itself a number of times inexpensively during its life cycle. So a very solid exterior envelope, multi-story, but the ability to respond to what are the current needs and how can we retrofit a particular area of the building to make sure that we are preparing kids for a future that we can't even predict right now. And that's where I think that is part of the other part of the why that we're going to really have to discuss in detail is how would teaching and learning look different in a new high school facility, especially in one where the needs that employers have and the diversity of needs and the changing needs are going at a pace so rapid that we've never seen before. And the ability to respond to that, more quickly.
Just, the functional obsolescence of kind of where we're at and what we have to keep putting money into something 10 years down the road. And I mean, education is changing. It's dynamic. It's always changing. And what are the jobs out there? I mean, more of the jobs are going to be geared towards more technology and a lot of those types of things. So what functional facilities on a two-story basis that you could use over and over and redesign themselves to be highly functional. One last point on when you're talking about 1,200 students for a senior high, and you were talking about best practices for about the amount of land that we should just have here. Were you talking about 60 acres?
So I think if you were to buy, and we have an advantage in the fact that since we have a plot of land that we currently own, that we would not have to go out and purchase additional. But I would tell you that if you're going to talk to an architect about saying we want to put a new high school out on a new plot, they're going to tell you need 60 acres.
Okay, 60 acres. So what is this?
Jim?
This?
Yeah, the high school lot. 22, 25?
Well, just the high school.
Yeah, acreage.
Memorial Field.
No, the whole high school lot on this side of Jefferson, whatever. So I mean, the thing that people have to realize, we really need to use our head and design this so it, with the limited space that we've got, we don't have 60 acres. So we've really got to be smart and build a nice two-story when you're going to have that plan in there. And if this ends up keeping this building or tearing it down, whatever, you're really limited on the amount of land you have.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm guessing 25 acres.
I was going to say, I think we're around 20.
Okay.
So I could get that specific answer for you, though. Absolutely.
And I think that just the important. Yep. Well, go ahead, Julie. I'm sorry.
No, I just wanted to mention that one of the scenarios that we were given was they did place the recent high school building, Andover High School, in the space.
Yeah, I've seen the Andover High School.
Yeah. So.
And I think the key thing, as well is, when you're thinking about that, if you think about the land purchase that you would have to do, that's a pretty significant component. And if you go back to the 25 public meetings that we had, where we started, if you remember, we started with a blank sheet of paper, in terms of saying, what do you think about our facilities? I was fully prepared to hear people really having a real affection and some nostalgia for this particular building here. But as you know, when you attended it, that's not what we heard. We did not hear affection for this particular building, but we did hear nostalgia for the location. And many people really believing that the location of Northfield High School, people calling it the gateway to downtown, not my words, those are the words of people who came to those facilities input sessions. It was really clear to me after those sessions, and I think to many of you who attended them, that people liked the location of the high school, which is why we focused the master facilities planning piece on this particular plot of land. And there is only so many acres, here that we have, so we would have to use the space very judiciously. And we don't plan to touch Memorial Field because that's another piece that we had heard, but still needing to recapture some of this space for the lost green space that we would have if we were to put up a new building on this particular facility. So it's a piece of responding to what we had heard from people during those sessions that we had, the input sessions, and what we heard through Thought Exchange, in terms of, I think what we've heard regularly is people saying, yes, we know there's going to be a need. The question is when, and the fact is we just have to be honest. The price tag for a new high school makes, your first thing you do is go, but when we look around at the buildings that have been built in the last 5 to 7 years, this is exactly, fortunately or unfortunately, however you look at it, right in line with what those other buildings cost. And so I think the facilities plan that was 2 years in the making, really came to fruition because of really listening to what people were saying about their belief that Northfield High School should stay on this plot, and what do you have to do to make sure that it does.
Very good.
Excellent, thanks Jeff. I think you really highlight what that next step is, and that's really starting to really maybe hone in on what the questions would be and how they would be asked. And so what I heard you say is that you're supportive of a work session, just like to get input from other board members if they want to continue with the work session format for this discussion. If that's working well for board members, I realize it's an additional commitment over and above, but if board members feel like that continues to be the best format for this discussion, we could go forward, not necessarily at this time with a specific date, but look at something mid to end of April, depending on the work that Dr. Hillman would need to do around the questions, and then the meeting of the two different groups. Amy?
I think another meeting would be good because it allows us just to focus on that one topic, because there's so much other business that we have to take care of that we can't get into the depth we need to. This is a big, important area for us to really be able to discuss thoroughly.
Yes, great. Well said, thank you. Any other comments? I echo Amy. Okay. So,
I'm in favor of a work session.
Okay.
I mean, the earlier we get on that and stay on top of those issues, and I think in the first of it, the old Chinese proverb of seek first to understand and then to be understood. So the questions that each board member has, to put their, to chew on the idea of what the levy's about and what it means as far as, what the high school looks like, to have that in your mind so you can make your best decisions. The earlier we do that, then we've got some months in there, because if your ask is going to be in November already, I mean, that'll come up pretty fast.
Well, I think that we've also been pretty clear before that I think it's essential that if you want to consider something for the fall, we need to have a decision in terms of what you'd like us to do, if anything, by this June. And there's nothing that says we have to, do this fall. But what we've heard is some energy and some synergy around really thinking it through and determining, is this the right time? And in order for us to effectively do what we need to do to run an election like that, you can go later, but my comfort level would be if you would give us the official direction no later than the June board meeting, because that allows us to make sure we have plenty of time to engage the community, make sure every single question is asked and answered to the best of our ability, to make sure that we do all the things that we need to do to run an election, and make sure that we are on top of those kinds of pieces. So I know some school districts wait till August to make those decisions. I humbly ask you not to do that to us. So really asking if we're going to do something, if it's something that you really would like to do, we need to have a decision as to what it might be for the fall of 17 in this June.
So I think once we I know Val has already reached out to the Finance Advisory Committee in terms of getting a date for them to meet, the Facilities Committee. Once those meetings take place, it's important that those meetings happen, I believe, before we go to a work session. And Dr. Hillman's had the chance to work on positioning questions around, formulating the thought process around ballot questions for us to review. So again, I think the timing of mid to end April seems like it's realistic. Time's going to go fast between now and June, so I appreciate Jeff saying that we do have to be sure we're watching the timelines here. Any other final questions or comments? Amy?
I just want to thank Val or Dr. Hillman for putting together this sheet of paper. This is exactly...
We didn't put it together. We asked Ellers to do it, and they did it for us, yes.
That's exactly what answers the questions that I had before.
Good.
Okay. Thank you.
Excellent. So between now and then, obviously, Amy, great comment that, you know, if there's other additional information that you want either in advance of the next work session or to be ensured it's included as part of the work session over and above some of the things we've mentioned, please get to Dr. Hillman. Okay. So that does wrap up the evening's items for discussion and or report. So we'll move on to items for individual action. Our first item this evening is the 2018-19 school year calendar, which we reviewed at our last board meeting. So as an item for individual action, is there a motion to approve the 2018-19 school year calendar as presented? So moved by Margaret. Is there a second? Second by Amy. Any discussion or comments regarding the school calendar?
And just a reminder that this isn't for next school year, this is 2 years out, and this is a really important thing that we have been trying to do. We tried to do it for a long time to be able to have some lead time. We actually will start getting questions for the 18-19 calendar probably quickly after July 1, as more and more people need to bid vacation further out. So we appreciate your consideration of this, and it does match almost all of the school calendar district interests that we've maintained for several years.
And for Dr. Hillman and I, who actually will have graduates on 19, we now know the graduation.
There we go,
And
yes.
start reserving the tent. Ellen?
I just thought I'd make a comment because this comes out of some of the meet and confer work, and if you end up having questions, which will not be for a while yet on this calendar, as to if you look at the December piece, is one of the things that the teachers really had asked of the calendar was to have a little bit longer break. So we were balancing that request with the thing that we've heard parents about coming, that they return to work on January 2nd. So if you have a question of why are they off December 20th and the 21st, and that's to try to respect that the teachers really, that they're working right up until Christmas is difficult, but that we're also trying to balance that with the needs of the community that's returning to work on January 2nd. So if you do have questions about that, that was one of the reasons that we had wanted to add a little bit of time before.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
One thing that I noticed, which may not be a big deal, but I just looked up, Easter that year is April 21st. It's very late. And I know we have to be very careful about how we consider things, but whether there would be I know some years we end up with the Monday off after Easter.
Well, and I think that, Amy, the key thing there is we have typically looked at that Monday off that you're talking about as usually a grading day at the end of the third quarter. And what we typically do is do that grading day at the end of spring break. Because the fact is that our third quarter goes right up till the beginning of spring break, almost always. Sometimes it may come back after spring break, and then we do that teacher work day right after spring break so that they can complete grades and so on and so forth. And we've really tried to standardize to the best of our ability so that people can be predictive of that last weekend, or the second to last week, or the last week in March, in terms of trying to have that spring break around that time. So rather than aligning with a particular holiday, trying to be relatively consistent in the couple of weeks that we do it. So actually, in this district, it's when it aligns with that particular holiday season, it's usually because it aligns with that spring break piece.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor of approving the 2018-19 school year as presented, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Our next item is a ratification of employment action. Is there a motion to ratify a proposed employment action by approving the resolution proposing discipline of an employee? Moved by Noel. Is there a second? Second by Ellen. This is a roll call vote.
Stratmon.
Aye.
Quinnell.
Aye.
Colangelo.
Aye.
Iverson.
Aye.
Cardy.
Aye.
Gerwitz.
Aye.
And Pritchard.
Aye. Motion carries. Okay, we will move on to the consent grouping. There were a few items that were added to the consent grouping in the table file. Is there anything anyone would like to add to the consent grouping?
Removed from the consent grouping.
I'm sorry, pull from the consent grouping. Thank you. We added to the consent grouping. Now, is there anything anyone in the table file? So is there anything anyone would like to pull from the consent grouping? Okay. Is there a motion to approve the consent grouping? Moved by Margaret. Is there a second? Second by Ellen. All those in favor of approving the consent grouping, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, we'll move on to items for information. We have the enrollment report. Dr. Coleman.
So you see the March 1st enrollment report in your packet. One piece I just do want to point out that we're going to correct for next month. What we have is you'll see that there's a significant, I just want to point out there's a significant increase in the students at the ALC compared to last month. And what will typically happen this time of the year is Northfield High School students who may need some credit recovery opportunities will enroll for part of their day at the ALC in order to, usually during what their study hall would be. And in this enrollment report, inadvertently, those students were also included in the ALC count. So typically how that might be is a student might have 6 classes in a study hall at the high school. They need to do a credit recovery through some independent study. And so they will take, and now they're actually using an online credit recovery tool. So they stay at the high school, but it's through our ALC program that they do that. And so we're gonna get into that and correct that, but I just wanted to make sure that you pointed that out. Otherwise, without that increase, we're very stable over last month.
It looks like the early childhood went up.
Yes, early childhood increased because again, you know, the key thing is we do early childhood screenings. If you remember when Cheryl Hall came to you this past fall to ask for additional early childhood special education, you're starting to see those students come as she had predicted.
Okay. So any other questions or comments on the enrollment report? Okay. That is the only item for information this evening. So future meetings, regular school board meeting Monday, March 27th, and then again on Monday, April 10th, both at 7 p.m. in the high school media center. With that, I ask for a motion that we adjourn. Moved by Noel. Is there a second?
Julie, don't we have to do the financial report? That was part of the consent report.
Thank you. Okay, thanks. You never know when I'll miss something. I appreciate that. Absolutely. Okay, so we have a motion by Noel to adjourn, but we need a second, unless everyone really wants to stay here. Second by Rob. Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We are adjourned.